Russian fighter jets seem to have collided with a US unmanned aircraft system, a US drone, over the Black Sea in international waters. 2 Russian Su-27 aircraft, the Americans are saying, conducted what they call an unsafe and unprofessional intercept with a US Air Force drone, MQ-9 unmanned aircraft. They say one of the jets clipped the drone. They were forced to bring it down. What do you make of all this?
Of unsafe, unprofessional incidents. We've done that in other situations. And so particularly in this case, given the reckless and dangerous behavior, and to demonstrate publicly what type of actions the Russians had taken, we felt that it was important to provide this imagery.
Russia has suggested that it didn't show the actual contact. How does this really just counter that narrative and show that this happened the way that the Pentagon has said it has? Yeah,
well, I think that our words and our actions speak for themselves, and similarly, Russia's inaccurate information, false information, obfuscation, grasping at straws, changing narratives also speaks for itself. So we're going to stay focused on the facts, and we're going to stay focused on our mission. Let me go to the next question, Liz. Ultimately, the Russian military and the Russian government is responsible for its own behavior. And when that behavior is unsafe and unprofessional, we're going to call it out, as we've done in this case. You've heard General Hecker in Europe and others call on the Russians to be safe and professional in conducting their operations, and that would be the expectation going forward. Thank you.
It is incumbent upon Russia to operate its military aircraft in a safe and professional manner.
They do not think the pilot hit the drone on purpose, saying the Russian pilot was simply incompetent and flat out dumb. Despite the video evidence, Russia denies the fighter jet collided with the drone, but is now searching the area where it crashed.
The US Air Force says 2 Russian aircraft conducted an unsafe and unprofessional intercept of the unmanned drone. The Russian jets were accused of dumping fuel on the drone and striking its propeller, causing damage so severe that its remote pilot was forced to bring it down. We're joined now by former Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. Now, as a former pilot, give us your take on what has happened here.
It's an amazing bit of footage, isn't it, for the 21st century. The US claimed that a couple of Russian jets have downed one of their $32 million drones. The Russians denied any involvement. But earlier today, the Americans released video footage of this. There were 2 passes by the Russian aircraft shown here. The first one, they're dumping fuel. The first one gets very close to the drone, but actually seems to miss it, and actually not. You can see it's running up. The propeller is at the rear of the drone here. And then the second aircraft, might have been the same aircraft or its wingman, has another go at attacking it. This time gets much, much closer to the drone and actually impacts the propeller. If we look, the Russian aircraft is starting to release some fuel. Now, normally you have a fuel dump system. If you have an emergency, you need to lower your weight before you land the aircraft. This is not, the Russian pilots aren't doing it for that reason. They're trying to use fuel as a weapon here, and they're trying to completely douse the drone, particularly the engine at the back, with aviation fuel, which will either blow up or cause the engine to fail. And that's why they're trying to get so close to it. If we look at the second image, though, close up, this is just before the impact. And this is because the drone operates at relatively slow speeds. I mean, it's 200 miles an hour, it still sounds fast, but relatively slow, and it's very manoeuvrable at those speeds. Most military jets, this jet will operate normally up to 8 times as fast as that, and it's really not comfortable at those slow speeds. It wallows through the sky. And when you watch the video through, what's happening is they're trying to get the jet as close as possible. Last minute, the Russian pilot realizes the closure rate is just awful, pulls back hard. You can see the curve of this plume here, and actually just blows it and washes into the jet and actually hits the propeller. The propellers on these drones are really fragile. If they're taken out, the drone goes down. Almost certainly damage the Russian aircraft as well, but of course, we'll probably not ever hear any more about that.
So is this definitely an accident or incompetence?
Almost certainly the Russians were not planning to shoot down the... If they wanted to do that, they'd have used bullets and just taken it out. Almost certainly they were messing around with it, and Russian incompetence led to the challenge. So I think it was almost certainly an act of incompetence by a Russian pilot. They don't get that much training. They don't get that many hours. An act of incompetence by a Russian pilot. They don't get that much training.
In the reckless and dangerous behavior. And when that behavior is unsafe and unprofessional, we're going to call it out. And you've heard General Hecker in Europe and others call on the Russians to be safe and professional in conducting their operations, and that would be the expectation going forward. Thank you.
It is incumbent upon Russia to operate its military aircraft in a safe and professional manner.
In one of the final acts of its 20-year war in Afghanistan, the United States fired a missile from a drone at a car in Kabul. It was parked in the courtyard of a home, and the explosion killed 10 people, including 43-year-old Zamarai Ahmadi and 7 children, according to his family. The Pentagon claimed that Ahmadi was a facilitator for the Islamic State and that his car was packed with explosives, posing an imminent threat to U.S. troops guarding the evacuation at the Kabul airport.
The procedures were correctly followed, and it was a righteous strike.
What the military apparently didn't know was that Ahmadi was a longtime aid worker who colleagues and family members said spent the hours before he died running office errands and ended his day by pulling up to his house. Soon after, his Toyota was hit with a 20-pound Hellfire missile. What was interpreted as the suspicious moves of a terrorist may have just been an average day in his life. A U.S. official told us that the strike on Ahmadi's car was conducted by an MQ-9 Reaper drone that fired a single Hellfire missile with a 20-pound warhead. We found remnants of the missile, which experts said matched a Hellfire at the scene of the attack. In the days after the attack, the Pentagon repeatedly claimed that the missile strike set off other explosions, and that these likely killed the civilians in the courtyard.
Significant secondary explosions from the targeted vehicle indicated the presence of a substantial amount of explosive material.
Because there were secondary explosions, there's a reasonable conclusion to be made that there was explosives in that vehicle.
But a senior military official later told us that it was only possible to probable that explosives in the car caused another blast. We gathered photos and videos of the scene taken by journalists and visited the courtyard multiple times. We shared the evidence with 3 weapons experts who said the damage was consistent with the impact of a Hellfire missile. They pointed to the small crater beneath Ahmadi's car and the damage from the metal fragments of the warhead. This plastic melted as a result of a car fire triggered by the missile strike. All 3 experts also pointed out what was missing: any evidence of the large secondary explosions described by the Pentagon. No collapsed or blown out walls, including next to the trunk with the alleged explosives. No sign that a second car parked in the courtyard was overturned by a large blast. No destroyed vegetation. All of this matches what eyewitnesses told us, that a single missile exploded and triggered a large fire. They have also admitted to knowing nothing about Ahmadi before killing him, leading them to interpret the work of an engineer at a US NGO as that of an Islamic State terrorist. 4 days before Ahmadi was killed, his employer had applied for his family to receive refugee resettlement in the United States. At the time of the strike, they were still awaiting approval. Looking to the US for protection, they instead became some of the last victims in America's longest war.
I'm here to brief the results of the investigation I directed following the report of civilian casualties from our strike in Kabul on 29 August. Having thoroughly reviewed the findings of the investigation and the supporting analysis by interagency partners, I am now convinced that as many as 10 civilians, including up to 7 children, were tragically killed in that strike. Moreover, we now assess that it is unlikely that the vehicle and those who died were associated with ISIS-K or were a direct threat to U.S. forces. I offer my profound condolences to the family and friends of those who were killed. This strike was taken in the earnest belief that it would prevent an imminent threat to our forces and the evacuees at the airport. But it was a mistake, and I offer my sincere apology. As the combatant commander, I am fully responsible for this strike and this tragic outcome. While the strike cell reported the presence of 2 adult males, one inside the vehicle and one outside the vehicle at the time of the strike, the cell initiated a review of their footage immediately following the report of civilian casualties and determined that a few partially obscured forms were briefly visible moving in the compound. This led to my initiation of an investigation within 24 hours of the strike. A comprehensive review of all the available footage and reporting on the matter led us to a final conclusion that as many as 10 civilians were killed in the strike, including up to 7 children. At the time of the strike, based upon all the intelligence and what was being reported, I was confident that the strike had averted an imminent threat to our forces at the airport. Based upon that assessment, I and other leaders in the department repeatedly asserted the validity of this strike. I am here today to set the record straight and acknowledge our mistakes. I will end my remarks with the same note of sincere and profound condolences to the family and friends of those who died in this tragic strike. We are exploring the possibility of ex gratia payments. And I'll finish by saying that while the team conducted the strike, did so in the honest belief that they were preventing an imminent attack on our forces and civilian evacuees, We now understand that to be incorrect. This particular strike, it certainly was a terrible mistake, and we certainly regret that. And I've been very clear that we take full responsibility for it.
And will anybody be held responsible?
We are in the process right now of continuing that line of investigation, and I have nothing for you now because that involves personnel issues.
Given the reckless and dangerous behavior